Theodore. He's a tugboat and a friendly tugboat too. A friendly tugboat too. Oh, Theodore likes to do the things that friendly tugboats do. Pushing and a pulling in the great big harbor, in the great big world is so much fun. So many brand new things to discover. Waking with the sun, gotta get the job done. Oh, Theodore and Emily, Fodak, Hank and George, and the harbor master too.
Oh, look at that. Not 2 episodes ago, we were told that the Big Harbor was the second biggest ice-free harbor in the world. Well, that statement just got tossed all the way across the ocean now, didn't it? But even if this wondrous sight is a sight for sore eyes, the biggest surprise was still yet to come for the tugboats.
Tugboats, announced the dispatcher in his most serious voice. As you know, it is our solemn and ancient pledge to keep the Big Harbor open. Through wind, or rain, or snow, or ice. But today the pilot boats cannot go out into the ice. Now their hulls are too thin, so the harbor might have to be closed. Closed? The tugboats knew that would be dangerous for the ships out on the freezing ocean, who wouldn't be able to come into a safe, warm dock. Well, I decided that the tugboats must take charge. It was the dispatcher's job to give them the news. Tugboats, he announced, today the pride of the Big Harbor depends on you.
Oh yeah, the tugs were definitely not expecting this. So after they are given the news, each of them are sent about the harbor with their jobs. Emily and George are sent to move Bobby Barge, Fodak moving Bonavista, and Theodore and Hank pulling the ferry twins back and forth across the harbor. Once all the jobs are completed, Theodore and Hank head off to play in the ice, and the others head back home. And yet, the surprises just keep on coming.
I know you are tired, announced the dispatcher. But a big oil tanker named Olympia has just arrived and we must get her into the harbor tonight. Do you think you can do it? Sure, said George. You can count on us, Mr. Dispatcher. But, said Emily, where are Theodore and Hank?
A bigger question would be, where the hell are your eyebrows, Emily? God, that's unsettling. Anyway, so the tugs button onto the ship and begin to tow her into the harbor. And at that very moment, Fodak's radio crackles a warning from the dispatcher.
A giant icebreaker named Inverness was arriving in the harbor to clear ice. All the ships and boats were to return to their docks as soon as possible. We'd better hurry, called Emily. Fodak decided he better take charge and direct the tanker into port. I'm in charge, snorted George. But Fodak, who had always wanted to be a pilot boat, gave directions to George in a commanding voice just like Pearl. Come over here now, George. Full ahead. George tried to turn, but with all the thick ice around him, he couldn't. So he plowed on ahead right into the middle of a heavy ice floe.
I'm pretty sure most of us have dealt with people like this, or we've been in that position ourselves. Everybody pounding on one another wanting to take charge. Pretty damn annoying if you ask me. So as the tugs carry on, George suddenly starts to feel hot due to his engines overheating. And moments later, 2 very familiar tugboats show up.
Well, what are you doing here? They said. Working. And you should have been helping us, said George. Well, you should have gone where I told you, said Fodak to George. Well, you should have let me be in front, said Emily. The tugs all began to quarrel about who should have done what and what should have been done when. And then they heard a deep, deep horn. It was coming from far out on the ocean. But it made all the tugs shiver because they knew what it meant. The giant icebreaker was coming and they had to get out of her way. And they were still a long way from the dock at the oil refinery. It's all my fault, said George sadly. I wanted to be in charge, but I guess I didn't do what I was supposed to do. Me too, added Fodak. And me, said Theodore. And then Emily agreed. Oh, said Hank finally, and also me. Just then, they heard the icebreaker's horn again. and she sounded closer.
Okay, so let's just float out there in the middle of the ocean while this icebreaker is getting closer. Smart move, guys. See, this is the kind of stuff that happens when you can't work together. But now is not the time to dawdle.
You're the best steerer, so you go in front. George should push because he's the strongest, and Hank and I can help by pushing on the side. And so, the brave tugboats set out to move the great ship through the dark and icy harbor. There was Emily the Vigorous, pulling in front, steering the tanker between the ice jams, and Theodore and Hank at the side, keeping her nice and steady as she went. And valiant George, who pushed and pushed on with all his might. And Vodok the Vigilant, leading the way, using his firefighting light to shine a safe path for his friends. Finally, the tugs saw the friendly lights of the Big Harbor just ahead. They were almost there.
It still kind of puzzles me why it was even necessary to mention the V-names. Could have just said their actual names and it wouldn't have changed anything. No matter. So now with the tugs safely back in the harbor, all they have to do is dock the ship and they can go home. Should be a piece of cake, right?
But docking that tanker proved to be the hardest job those tired tugs had ever faced. For the harder they pushed, the tighter the ice packed in between the tanker and the dock. Until they couldn't budge her another inch no matter how they tried. Then they heard the icebreaker's deep horn again, but much closer now. No one was thinking about pride or solemn pledges anymore. Instead, each tugboat was thinking they'd let the harbor down.
I'm a bit confused as to how the icebreaker is still not in the harbor yet. Going back to the tugs moving the ship, you'd think the icebreaker would have caught up to them by this point, depending on how thick the ice was, I suppose. And yet the ship's horn sounds like it's super close. I really don't know how else to explain that. So anyway, in times like these, who does everybody turn to for a plan?
All eyes turned to Theodore. If anyone could think of a plan, it was Theodore. Good old Theodore. The tugs held their breath. If Hank and I were pushing the ice around the harbor, why couldn't we all push it away here? That way we could dock the tanker. Well, that's exactly what they did. Theodore and Hank cleared away the ice. George and Emily pushed and pushed. And Vodok stayed close by and directed everyone. With all the tugs working together, the oil tanker was safely in her dock just as the icebreaker sounded her warning to clear the harbor. They had done it. The tugs all tooted their horns with pride. And even though they were very, very tired, they were very, very excited and couldn't wait to tell all the other ships and boats in the harbor about their great adventure, just as soon as they were back at their dock. Or maybe it might have to wait until the very next day.
And that concludes the day ice came to the harbor. This was a pretty big learning experience for all of the tugboats. The episode itself definitely got the message through, showing us all what happens when we all forget about teamwork. The tugs may have been put in charge, but eventually, all this in charge stuff went to their heads, as we all saw. At least they learned their lesson in the end, and they got the important job done. I was pretty amazed with some of the visuals we saw in this episode, especially the nighttime shots. They are gorgeous looking, like my god. And is it me, or was I the only person who got chills whenever Inverness's horn went off? Even though we don't see him, it still managed to give me goosebumps. As I mentioned before, most of us have probably been in the tug's position and have had that in-charge power get the better of us. Maybe not as dramatic, but you get my point. And kudos to Graham for really pounding on those heavier notes in the scenes where the tugs are moving Olympia. Definitely some of the best music we've heard from him. Overall, I think this episode is pretty good, with a great moral for the kids, beautiful scenery, and heart-pounding music you do not want to pass up. I would highly recommend it. Up next is Theodore's Bad Dreams.